Okay. Order. Welcome to today's meeting of the Public Accounts Commission on the NAO's new 5-year strategy and main estimates for 2025-26. Could I ask you to introduce yourselves for the record, please?
Morning. I'm Gareth Davies. I'm the Comptroller and Auditor General at the NAO.
Hello, I'm Fiona Reynolds. I chair the board of the NAO.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Sheeran. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the NAO.
Welcome, and if I'll start the question, you're very welcome. You highlighted in your strategy and the evidence to the PAC that you're looking to use your work as a platform to highlight and encourage positive innovation in government. Do you think the NAO has previously acted as a barrier to innovation and risk-taking?
No, I don't, but that is a perception that some certainly have expressed in the past, less so recently, but it's still there in the system. And so we took the opportunity of our new strategy to take that head on, actually, firstly for the positive reason that we think innovation is going to be an absolutely essential tool for government as it tries to meet increasing demand, tackle increasing risks, but with limited resources. And just doing the same thing but slightly better isn't going to cut it, we don't think, in the coming period. So we think innovation is essential for delivering value for money for taxpayers. So that's really why it's so central in our strategy, because as you know, our strategy is focusing on productivity and resilience in government. But as you say, there's also the opportunity to dispel what I think is a myth that good auditing is somehow a barrier to innovation. The way it's been expressed to us in the past is that civil servants are sometimes reluctant to take risks with public money because they think they'll just be criticised in public in front of the PAC on the back of a critical NAO report. I said in my speech in February, my experience of PAC is much more that members are likely to challenge sustained poor performance by public servants rather than criticise well-managed innovation. But even so, we think this bears stating very clearly. So we've said in our strategy that our work will recognise well-managed innovation where we find it. We will actually celebrate good examples where we think there are lessons to be learnt from it for other organisations. There are examples where we've already done that in recent years. We'll do that more systematically in the next few years. And we'll also pick topics where we think there are really strong innovation lessons to be learnt. We're working on a report to be published in the next few months, for example, on the use of data analytic techniques to prevent and detect fraud across government. There's huge potential for very significant savings by using the available technology, very well used in the banks, for example, now, not systemically used so much in government. So just one example where we think by highlighting successful innovation elsewhere, there are really positive lessons for government.
What about a situation where innovation's perhaps not gone as well as had been hoped? I suppose that's going to be what influences the departments if they see the NAO coming down heavy on that. Nothing's changed. So how are you going to deal with those situations?
Exactly. Well, I think there's the big focus here is on the discipline of risk management and setting a clear risk appetite. It's clearly, a good innovation is not just about reckless flinging public money around. It is about, so for example, if you take the well-known example of the vaccines in the pandemic, obviously a very pressing need for something to be done very quickly. A lot of expertise from development of vaccines was brought to bear very quickly, but a lot of risk taken with public money, guarantees to drug companies to cover their losses if, in the case of the candidate vaccines, didn't work in their case, and we, I think we didn't report in a way that that came down heavily on those examples. I think if you take the audit of the UKRI, the Research and Innovation Agency, spends a lot of money on research and development across the sectors. We're doing a report there on how their programme encourages or discourages innovation. Again, we're going to get right to the heart of what does well-managed innovation look like here. So I think, what we're committing to is to highlight examples of investment in new techniques which haven't paid off, but still represents a valid and effective use of public money, because the lessons from those experiments have been applied to future investments.
Fiona, would you say in the past it's been part of the NAO's institutional culture to focus on what's gone wrong rather than what's gone right?
Well, Chair, you've heard me say in the past that my passion is for us to have impact. You can have impact in a number of ways, and we certainly have pointed out very clearly where public money has been wasted or there have been investments that have not turned out for good. And it's very important that we're able to do that. But I think what our new strategy represents is our determination to make sure that all our findings, whether on the grounds of money poorly spent or indeed well spent in the case of innovation, lead to something positive. And therefore, we're really passionate about making a positive influence on the way government plans and spends money in the future. So yes, learn lessons, be clear. If we do need to say things have gone badly, with absolute clarity say so, but turn everything we can into making things better.
I'll just add a very topical example. Yesterday we published one of our lessons learned reports, and this one was on the use of private finance in infrastructure projects. So we've taken all of the NAO's work over the decades on PFI and the PPP schemes that succeeded PFI, and to extract the lessons from those, what were innovations at the time, to extract the lessons from those to inform the government as it contemplates the use of private finance for infrastructure now. And so a great example of taking past innovations, extracting the lessons and putting them in place in front of the people who are going to be making policy and decisions on this, so there's time to get it right, learn from the past and so on. So it's a good example of this attitude in action, I think.
Geoffrey.
Just, with your indulgence, just make a comment on that last discussion. I do think the PAC and the NAO are too much concentrated on criticising what's gone wrong and not actually calling out when things go right. And, for example, the other day on our cyber hearing, when the Cabinet Office had fulfilled their quota of cyber specialists, I actually said to Kat Little, congratulated her on that performance. So I think we need to perhaps think, both of us, the PAC and the NAO, a slight sort of cultural change in that respect. Sorry, Chairman, that's your indulgence. I may come to my question. On a high-level ambition, CNAG and Dame Fiona, of the NAO is about supporting more productive and resilient public services. We are at a time of great change. That could be done perhaps by new technology, in which case the government's got to find some money to deal with legacy services. It's also got to have a cultural change within the civil service to bring that about. Both things seem to be fairly slow. There are other themes that perhaps go across your government auditing, things like climate change, cyber. How will you deal with those things in terms of productivity and in terms of presentation of departmental report and accounts?
Yeah, I mean, the reason we've alighted on productivity and resilience is partly just because of that. You mentioned two systemic risks that this, like all governments, this government is having to tackle. So climate change, cybersecurity. You could add into that the public health risks. So we've just seen a pandemic. We've reported on antimicrobial resistance, another very significant risk that the country has to tackle. So these are risks that we now know very painfully, if they're not well managed, and if the country lacks resilience, can be very expensive for the government. 400 billion cost of COVID, which is reflected in the cost of borrowing now every year. So that's why we've alighted on these as the two value for money themes. And so your examples of climate change and cybersecurity, first of all, we will reflect that in individual pieces of work we do where those risks need to be managed well. But we're also continuing our approach of thematic reports across the whole of government in those areas. And as you know from the PAC agenda, we've just recently reported on cybersecurity across government and how that risk is being tackled. We've previously reported on how government's organised to address climate change risks, and we'll continue with that systemic programme across the National Risk Register. And that kind of balance of resilience to risks and service productivity feels to us a good summary of the value for money challenge that government's facing. And
change in technology to bring about increased productivity?
Yes, I mean, I gave a speech in February which focused on what is likely to be able to drive the productivity improvement we need to see, and clearly technology is the big opportunity there. We're seeing that ourselves in our own work, and we can say more about that later when we talk about our estimate. But I think I also said in February that it'd be a mistake to think it's all about the technology. It's certainly a very important tool and will need to be used well. But it is also about leadership and skills, the specialist skills to do this well. As you know, as we've said many times, it's anybody can cut spending. It's making genuine efficiency improvements that takes the skilled leadership and management. And so I think that you mustn't underestimate that. And it's also about how services are organised. It's about the whole system approach to achieving better outcomes for less money, including the kind of central-local where decisions are made, but also cross-government, recognising that a lot of the important risks that government's taking cut across departments. So actually getting the right system organisation for delivering greater efficiency is also crucial. So technology essential, but there's more to it than that.
If I could just add on the strategy, thank you. The challenges the government and the country faces are really serious. Improving public services in many ways and the resilience and productivity of public services is a heroic ambition that you might feel for the NAO to include at the heart of our new strategy. But it's very much about recognising that we have an insight across government, both in the way that money is spent well or spent badly or spent inefficiently or spent in ways that don't understand the consequential impacts that are often unseen at the time of an initiation of a programme or project. And I think what we feel is that we have a lot more to add by bringing together all the insights from our work and our experience and helping government more proactively to solve these problems. And they're mostly going to be a combination of things. It won't be a matter of technology or alone. It is a lot about leadership, about experience, about learning, about the cumulative knowledge of having watched over the last years the way money is spent or not. So I think it's important to understand our strategy as a real step change in both the way we're going to use our insights, but also our relationship with government in offering solutions and offering our experience more proactively. So we're very proud of it, but I think it's also clear to say that it's a cultural change for us as well as for those in government.
We time for a supplementary?
Yeah, by all means.
Both of you, clearly all of your work is dedicated towards securing the way public money is spent. We're just about to have a step change in the way local government is organised. And we know very well the problems with local government auditing at the current time, let alone what might happen in the future. Now, to these newly created combined authorities, billions are going to be transferred from central government to local government. Is there a danger that we start to lose control of the way that public spending is organised?
Certainly the quality of management, risk management and financial management needs to be commensurate with the responsibilities that are being passed to these new structures. And so, you know, with greater responsibility and larger amounts of money, you need stronger systems and better assurance. As you say, clearly the state of external audit in local government at the moment is nowhere near where it will need to be to deal with that properly. And government is legislating at the moment to bring in a local audit office to strengthen the local audit and get back to where we should be, which is timely, robust, audited accounts. It's just a basic requirement before we get into complex risk management. But then, as you say, if significant amounts of money are going to be devolved to these new structures locally, the governance and management and financial management in those organisations needs to be strong. There's an opportunity, actually, with the smaller number of bigger organisations to be able to recruit and retain the talent needed to do a good job of that in financial management. But that won't happen automatically, and so the sector has a big responsibility here to understand the importance of a pipeline of well-trained, well-experienced financial managers, and to make sure that finance isn't treated as an admin function that can be cut when cuts are needed. And so I think you've highlighted a really important point, that the quality of financial management in those new structures needs to be commensurate to the risk.
Could I just follow up on that point? Your answer reflected the concern around managing money in new entities. But what you may have is a variable geometry, if you like, across the country, with 3 or 4 existing unitaries fusing some functions and transport and infrastructure investment into a new entity. Do you also have confidence that you can address the issue of duplication, combined entities having clear functional responsibility against their sort of legacy home organisations? Because one of the roles that you surely must be able to fulfil is a sort of value for money around that aggregation decision.
Yes, I mean, of course, our responsibilities don't extend to auditing individual local authorities on either accounts or value for money, but it was very carefully delineated at the time that the Audit Commission was abolished that the NAO could only look at systems of how the national systems applied at a local level. But that does open an opportunity to address the issue that you've raised, I think, because clearly there are, Greater Manchester is regarded as the most developed arrangement where you have unitary authorities collaborating on sub-regional topics like.
We need to learn
transport.
The lessons from.
So what works there? Because I don't think even Greater Manchester would say that everything has been equally successful. So we are thinking about how could we play a useful role in extracting some of the lessons there about positive and negative to inform how these more immature structures could usefully go about that new task.
Encouraging, thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Gareth, Davies, part of your strategy talks about increasing influence with the Public Accounts Committee, but also with departmental select committees. Now, your work with the PAC is well known and well understood, but to what extent do you think that more could be done to support and work closely with departmental select committees in particular?
Yes, we do regard ourselves as here to serve Parliament as a whole. Clearly, PAC is it's statutorily the main focus for the NAO's work, and the Public Accounts Committee has first call on the reports that we produce, which I think is well understood. So the issue is then about prioritisation within our total resources, because clearly, like everybody, our resources are finite. What we try to do is, first of all, make sure that we have good links with every select committee in the House of Commons. So since the election, I've now met with every select committee chair outside PAC, including the Environmental Audit Committee, where we have a pretty close working relationship already. And we're continuing our programme of secondments. So between 8 and 10 NAO staff at any one time are on secondment to Parliament. Nearly all of them are on the staff of different select committees. And that's a very well established, very well received operation that obviously is very good for our staff's development, but also very well used by those select committees. And we respond to requests for briefings, private and public, from select committees. I'm going to give evidence in public to the Housing and Local Government Committee in April, off the back of our report on local government financial sustainability. That's a typical example of the way in which we support the work on individual inquiries at select committees. And so, the opening meetings I've had with every chair is to ensure that we then have a good dialogue and a good channel of communication. So when they either spot something we're doing that they're particularly interested in, or they'd like us to ask us to help with a particular topic, that is an easy communication in both directions.
You mentioned finite resources at the start, and I think we're going to come into that slightly later. I don't want to preempt that. But in terms of the engagement and the work with departmental select committees, have you got enough resources to do as much as you would like?
Well, enough is a subjective concept with all this. We certainly think we can make a meaningful contribution to the other select committees outside the PAC with the resources we have and are set out in our estimate. Of course, could we productively use more? Yes, of course we could. But I think given the pressure on our resources, as you've seen in the rest of the estimates, this feels like an appropriate balance for us to strike. And as I say, I think the other select committees are genuinely positive about the contribution we're able to make, even within the resources we now have.
And just, sorry, yes.
If I might just give an example of the support we give to other select committees. In the last year, we've produced 18 tailored reports for select committees, which includes our programme of departmental overviews, which give an overview of departmental finances, which have all been quite well received.
Okay, that's very helpful. And just a final one, if I may, Chair. To what extent do you think there's a synergy to be gained around working more closely with the House Service, for instance, the scrutiny units, to look at, for example, the spending review?
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca might want to add to this, because we have a good relationship with the scrutiny unit and the House of Commons Library, actually. And again, we've had exchanges of staff in both directions. We give talks at their events and they at ours. And we do collaborate on individual pieces of work where for example, a topic that we're currently working on, and they become aware of that and want to engage. But I don't, Rebecca, have anything to add to that?
No, I'd just emphasise that that's quite a long-standing secondment relationship that we have with the scrutiny unit, which is probably our key point of close working.
Thank you, Chair.
Vince.
Thank you. I'm going to come on to the main estimate. Obviously, it says here in your report that it's set to increase by 8.9 million compared to the current financial year. And I understand that's in part down to new auditing responsibilities, but it would just be useful to get a balance here between how that increase works in terms of being between new audit responsibilities and meeting the demands of advanced audit standards. And also, it would just be interesting as a point, you've got 1.5 million here for one-off costs of new work. I just wondered if you could perhaps give a little bit more detail about that.
There's a lot in that question, but it is the heart of the estimate, so I'll just take you through the big chunks of it. So the first one is audit quality. We've been on a long journey to improve our audit quality in response to new auditing standards, new regulatory standards that audits are unrecognisable from 5 years ago in the private sector and in the public sector. And we've worked very hard on that. In the face of some quite challenging feedback from the FRC's inspections of our work in the previous couple of years, very pleased to say that the results that they're about to publish in the next few weeks show a very significant improvement, so much so that every audit they inspected of ours from the 23-24 audit cycle has met the required standard, and that's the first time the NAO has been in that position. So we're doing something right on audit quality. Absolutely not time to declare victory on that until we see that sustained over many years, but the investments are paying off. So this estimate includes £2.5 million to complete that series of investments, particularly this time on the specialist advice we need to meet the regulatory standards on complex judgments in the account. So we're talking here about financial instrument valuation, actuarial valuation, property valuation and so on, where nowadays the auditing standards require independent expertise to be applied in support of the audit. So that's the first chunk, is completing that journey on audit quality. As you said, there's new organisations that we're being required to audit. This isn't a voluntary choice on our part. So either new public bodies, such as the Infected Blood Authority, we're auditing their accounts for the first time this summer. A very significant part of the Cabinet Office's set of arm's-length bodies now. And a handful of other new ones already for this year, and more to come next. Then there are bodies that already existed but are coming inside the public sector boundary, and we are being required to take over the audit from their private sector auditors. By far the biggest example of that is the train operating companies, which are 4 of them already inside the public sector boundary, and the others slated to move across by next year. So we are, and it's a good example, this, of where things have moved on since we produced the estimate, because as you will have seen in the estimate, we budgeted for 2 of those new organisations for 25-26. It now looks like it's going to be 5 or 6 of those, and the final number to be confirmed very shortly. So we've done a lot of detailed planning, as that became clear in the last few weeks. We had a lot of planning on, with this estimate, how much of that can we accommodate? And the answer is that's not going to be easy, because these are large organisations. We're talking about the train operating companies, South West Trains, Great Anglia Trains, those big organisations. Some fairly significant audit risks in those audits. So that will need us to gear up very significantly beyond the amount we'd expected to. Right. So we think this, we're regarding that as a productivity challenge to the NAO. We need to respond, absorb as much of that as possible in this estimate, but we didn't put a big contingency in here at all. So it may be that we have to come back to the Commission later in the year with a supplementary estimate if that proves to be just untenable. But we're going to do our very best to accommodate as much as possible through productivity. And that's not just a kind of bland promise. We are seeing some very tangible productivity improvements coming through our investment in technology, which I can share with you later. So new work is another one. So just to explain that the train operating companies, when they come across, they will be paying us audit fees. So the cost that we will need to reflect from in the estimate is the setup costs that we don't pass on to the companies themselves. Right. That's our long-standing practice. Is as we familiarise ourselves with a new sector, for example, in this case, and it's not the choice of the train operating companies to appoint us as their auditors. It's always been the practice that we absorb the setup costs in the first year. Thereafter, they will cover their own costs through the audit fee. There are some of the new public bodies, though, do need to be paid for out of the estimate entirely, so the audit of the Infected Blood Authority will be funded by the estimate. Yeah. So that's the other. And then the final chunk of budget pressure for next year is our pay award. Clearly, there's every employer having to pay the extra national insurance contributions, but our pay award is based on our benchmarking of how do we maintain a competitive position, because as we've discussed with the Commission before, we're in direct competition not just with the public sector but absolutely with the private firms for qualified auditors. And so our pay estimate, our pay award estimate is arrived at through benchmarking very carefully. What would it take to maintain our turnover to the level that we've currently got it? We're seeing good retention rates at the moment for the first time in many years, and we're determined to keep it that way in the interest of quality and delivery.
On the 1.5 million then, so I'm slightly going to rephrase my question based on what you've just said. The question I was going to ask is we won't expect to see that in future estimates, but I mean it depends if we get new work, doesn't it? Is the simple answer to that? Yeah, that's great. Can I come on to staffing increases? Obviously, I'm one of those visual learners, so you give me a graph, and that's what interests me particularly. But obviously, it's gone up from the prediction, I should say, is going from 843 to 1,127, and I recognise that a lot of what you just said is probably part of the reasons for that. But I suppose my question really is, at the moment the graph is doing that and it's going up, do you predict there's going to be a time when that will level out and plateau?
I mean, of course, you have to start an answer like that with other things being equal, but based on what we know at the moment, and of course, government has started announcing the abolition of public bodies as well as the creation of public bodies. So if you just take NHS England, for example, there won't be any impact in the year we're talking about here because there will still be the audit of that system to carry out over that period. But in due course, it depends what structures replace NHS England. That could have an effect of reducing our workload. So, for example, if more is aggregated into larger units, that does reduce audit workload because we audit to a level of materiality, and so we won't be having to test at such a low level if there are a smaller number of large organisations. So we're keeping a very close eye on, because I'm assuming that the NHS won't be the only bit of government that's reorganised in that way. So a very, very close tracking of the future workload implications of restructuring of public services and departments. So at the moment, we think that is the kind of other things being equal, it won't go any higher than that. The reason it's going up in the next couple of years is partly the new work. It's also, this is an important point to mention, I think, it's also the fact that we are insourcing some of the work that we've previously outsourced to the firms. And that's because the price differential has become quite severe. And this is partly the way that the firm's own economics have developed. They're concentrating their work on larger, more risky enterprises, more complex entities. Essentially, we now agree with and they agree with us that we can't afford to use them for straightforward public bodies in the way we had been doing in the past. So we're insourcing the more straightforward organisations. And just to give you an illustration of the productivity gain of that, the 9 audits we've insourced for the current year, we've been able to budget for £500,000 less than we would have had to spend if they'd continued to be outsourced. So this is serious productivity improvement for the same audit quality. Where we still will need to outsource our work is where they are audits of a very specialised type of which we don't have enough to maintain a specialist team. I take UK export finance as a good example of that, essentially an insurance structure. And so we expect to have to continue to outsource that because developments in auditing standards for insurance type organisations are now very complex. So we'll continue to outsource where we have that requirement, but our plans over the next 2 or 3 years are to bring in to move our outsourcing percentage down from about 20% of our audits to 15%, and that will save us around about £1.5 million a year by the time that process is complete. But of course, to do that, we need a headcount increase ourselves to deliver that work more efficiently. So it's the volume of the work and it's the insourcing are the two reasons for the headcount improvement.
And just one final question I made, Chair, and I'm kind of reassured that you're just going as auditing straightforward public bodies and not is the straightforward bit rather than these complicated audits. So that's quite reassuring. And just on a really practical sense, because I recognise that sort of well, isn't quite transient, but there's a better word for that. But the ever-changing sort of feast of the audits that you're having to do and the challenges with that. I just wondered, in terms of staffing numbers, I know you've got London and Newcastle headquarters. Yeah. Is that going to lead to any sort of change in that respect?
We're trying to concentrate as much of our increased recruitment in Newcastle as possible. Apart from, it's obviously a different recruitment market, which gives us really good access to high-quality auditors from that part of the world. Also, we've got a little bit more capacity in our Newcastle office than in our London office to increase headcount. So, for those two reasons, we think more of the increase will be there than in London.
Okay, John Glenn.
Could I turn now to more granularity on your personnel? So staff is 70% of your costs, and this year the amount you're spending on staff, or this coming year, will go up by 11.6%, an average of 58 full-time equivalents. Yet when we look at your plans for graduate recruitment, they're up nearly 43% from a typical 70 to 100. Given that a lot of work at the lower level is, there's an opportunity for some degree of automation, how would you justify that rather abnormal increase in your graduate intake this coming year?
Yes, we did take in 100 in the most recent intake last September. Okay. As it happens, we're forecasting quite a significant reduction on that for this September, which again has moved on since the estimate was produced, so worth explaining that, I think. First thing, our retention of newly qualified auditors has improved, which we've been working very hard on for some years, because obviously having worked hard to train these people and become expert in this type of auditing, it's in our interest to retain as many as we can. And our turnover, we kind of budget for around about 20% of those people leaving each year. At the moment, we're on about 11 or 12%. And so there's a material improvement in the number of people we have remaining with us. And that's allowed us to bring down the graduate intake for this year to reflect that. And of course, it's not just numbers. Those are now trained auditors ready to go rather than new graduates who arrive not knowing what to do. So there's a quality improvement implied in that also. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you mentioned the impact of new technology on productivity. We are starting to see for the first time that the implementation of new tools is reducing the volume of work required from the most junior part of our skill mix. So it's early days. This is early days, but there's a tool that we've implemented across our audit practice called Data Snipper that the firms are using also. And
does that mean the graduates can do more themselves?
It means that they can. They're not doing the drudgery bit of the job as much as they were. So this is for taking a big audit sample, matching an invoice to a supporting record and to what's in the trial balance. That's a very manual process in the past. This tool makes that 3 times faster and automated. And to be honest, more interesting as well. And so lots of positives about this. The idea you have to go through a very tedious spell of training to become a qualified auditor. That is changing visibly now, and this is just the start, we think. So I'm not claiming that this is kind of large volumes of staff in one go, but we estimate just on the first few experience we were able to trim our recruitment by 5 graduates just on that one tool. So that's the beginning of what's clearly coming to be this is going to be a big development in auditing. And rather than just automating bits of the process as that tool does, we'll also, once we get to the point where we've downloaded the ledger from the government department through a portal and being able to apply AI tools to spot anomalies in the data, look at the whole population of transactions, not just a sample test, this is going to be a radically different audit in a few years' time. And as you say, the profession is grappling with the implications of this for its training model. Where are the qualified auditors of the future coming from if we need fewer? Now, I think it's because it doesn't go to zero, but I think instead of this pyramid that we've had for decades, people are expecting it to be a much more kind of gentle gradient, I think, for the future.
So that's really helpful and gives us good understanding of the evolution in the work profile for your graduates. But given the significant, presumably, costs of putting people through the formal professional qualifications, and the attrition that you will have, I think many of your staff start there, go off and work in a professional services firm, and then come back again. Have you sort of given any thought to what sort of mechanisms you put in place to ensure that we get value for money for that investment in the training? And even if people leave for a season, that there's an incentive to anchor them back in.
Yes, our retention rate at qualification is a lot better than the average of the firms, partly because we're a unique organisation. You
attract a different sort of cadre.
We do, and if we do our job well, we get people addicted to the interest of the work that the range of organisations we have access to and so on is very difficult to replicate if that's your area of interest, that's very difficult to replicate elsewhere. So even at 80% retention, and we're doing a bit better than that now, that's a lot better than the firms see on qualification. So we start from a good place on this. We did change one of the reasons we've got better retention now is we changed our grading structure, because it was obvious to us that it was taking too long after qualification to attain the audit manager grade. And we've restructured so that we now have audit managers and senior audit managers, and that's given us faster career progression, greater exposure to management responsibility earlier, and has really helped retain our very well qualified people as when they qualify. So I think that's helped also. Beyond that, I think at the moment we're very pleased with where we are on retention, so we're not planning any big changes in the short term, but we just have to keep an eye on this. This is a war.
Do you compel people to lock in for a certain number of years after qualifications?
No, we don't. So on the main audit qualification, people are free to resign when they qualify. Again, that is quite industry standard now. Where we pay for a postgraduate type qualification, let's say MSc and so on, which is quite unusual, we do have lock-in around that because those are bespoke arrangements, and we do require people to work for us or pay some of it back, if they leave within a certain time.
Thank you very much.
You've spoken about the retention of staff has improved. I've been here many times when you've spoken about the difficulties of recruitment and retention. So that's good to hear. Do you think that the pay award of 3.5% was pitched about right? That you came to the right conclusion?
Obviously, we've looked at this several times as things change around us. We do. In answer to your question, we think it's about right for maintaining the continuity of staff that we've managed to achieve. And as I explained, given what's coming our way in the train operating companies, we absolutely can't afford to see our turnover increase beyond where it is now. So that remains really business critical for us, I think, as an organisation. And just to put it in context, last year our pay award was 3%. The civil service pay award was 5% for the same year, and that was noticed, I think, by our staff. In the private firms, the benchmarking data we have was between 4 and 5%. And then coming forward to this year, if at 3.5%, if we are slightly above, and we don't know where the civil service will settle for this year, we think we've benchmarked well with the private sector. But even if it's, say, slightly higher than the civil service outcome for this year, taking the 2 years together will still be below where they've been. So for those reasons, and the board, I'll bring Fiona in a second, because the board is challenged on this as well. We think we're in about the right spot.
So Fiona, the staff and the unions reacted positively too.
Yes, indeed, but I think that's also because we've spent a lot of time making sure that our relationship with the union is constructive and requires us to kind of work with them over the whole period of the year on issues other than pay alone. And I think we have seen a bit of a step change in the quality of that relationship overall. So obviously we're pleased that they are supporting the 3.5%, but I think it's due to other longer term factors than pay alone. Now, the board spent a lot of time discussing this issue. As you can imagine, it's a very important one, both for staff retention, but also for the kind of wider sense of, are we offering our people who often see the private sector as their main comparator, not the civil service, to stay with us, to be with us, to give us that long-term investment of time and commitment. And we wouldn't be putting this forward if we didn't feel that it was absolutely at the right level. And we feel very strongly that this is part, again, of our more strategic relationship with the staff, building their loyalty and commitment, and indeed making sure that we're well equipped to do the work which is growing, as you've heard, that we are required to do. So it's not a matter taken at all lightly.
So you're confident you won't be coming back for another estimate for a further pay award?
Our intention certainly is not to come back to you on pay. As Gareth has already said, there is a possibility that if we get a very significant amount of new work, that will we need to leave that option open for that reason. But no, we're expecting this pay award to be one that will sit right for the entire year.
Thank you for that. Can I just move on to the issue of previously outsourced audits being brought in-house? What's been the financial impact of that?
I covered a bit of this earlier on. In this year, as I mentioned, we've brought 9 of the audits we used to outsource in-house, and we've been able to budget for £500,000 less cost than if we hadn't done that. So that's pretty significant on just 9 audits, and it just illustrates, I think, as I say, that the private sector market has changed fundamentally in recent years, and the firms that we use are much more selective about the audits they take on, and their fees have risen significantly to meet regulatory standards. So now we in turn we have to be much more discerning in the audits we ask them to do for us. So we've got a new procurement coming up, a new framework contract where we'll be reflecting this insourcing plan and moving from, as I said, about 20% a couple of years ago to 15% within the next 2 or 3 years, just gradually managing that additional workload for ourselves. And our estimate is that will mean that's costing about £1.5 million less than if we'd continued to outsource.
And what proportion of the audits do you anticipate outsourcing as we go forwards?
Well, I think getting to 15% by 2027 is our plan. So it's still a significant number of audits, and for the reasons I said earlier on, that not just the fact that we're getting specialist expertise where we need it, but also working with several of the large firms, we get to see the developments in their methodology, the approach they're taking to new technology, which has definitely been some of the inspiration behind our own developments. So there are strategic benefits of continuing to have some level of outsourcing, just to make sure we're in touch with developments in the profession.
And how do you come to the conclusion of and assess whether it's better to outsource an audit or to conduct it yourself? And is there a trade-off in terms of the standard of the auditing?
Well, there's no quality difference. I mean, we've, as I mentioned earlier on, we've seen a big increase on our own quality ratings. I've got to mention that they will be the best of any of the firms this year, because that hasn't been the position in the last 2 or 3 years, and so we're very pleased with that. But you've got to maintain that, obviously, for it to be credible. So it's not a quality issue. The way we are deciding on which ones to insource is essentially how much specialist expertise do we require from the firm. If actually it's well within our wheelhouse as an organisation, then we should be doing those audits. That's our stance now. Accepting that does mean that we have to take more of the resourcing risk. So this is why the competitiveness of our offer to staff has to be sufficient, because we're essentially transferring the resourcing risk from the private sector to ourselves. So we have to be able to staff up with the right quality of staff to do the work. But we're absolutely confident that the audits we'll be taking on are well within our sphere of capability.
Okay, John, good.
Yes, could I just turn to the issue of laptops? Your capital budget is going to be 7% less at 4 million this year. How can you reassure us that you're getting that at the most efficient level? Do you look at leasing? And can you reassure us that you're in line with best practice in terms of cyber risk and all those other things?
Rebecca, do you want to speak?
Thank you. On the question of laptops, our total laptop estate is about 1,400, which allows for us to have some spares and enough for temporary staff who join us during our busiest season. We manage our laptop estate through a rolling programme of investment. About £600,000 of the kind of capital that is there in the estimate is for replacement of the laptops. We do use quite high-end laptops because of the volume of data that our teams have to wrangle with, and because we do need them to be of the highest information security standards. The reason we replace them on a rolling basis is that works best for our productivity and our resilience. So you're making sure that we are replacing them frequently enough that they're performing well and our people are not losing precious time due to underperformance of kit. But that also kind of spreads the cost across. We expect them to last about 4 years, and the price we pay comes including a 4-year warranty.
Comprehensive, thank you.
Just on the capital budget, I wonder if this is a good moment to say. I mean, our capital budgets are not predictable in the sense apart from the laptops, which is but we've spent money, as you know, on refurbishing the Newcastle office, or new lease on the Newcastle office. We've also been improving the Buckingham Palace Road office, which has been incredibly successful and welcomed by staff. But we do have quite lumpy items coming occasionally, and I just feel it would be wise to
warning us. There's more.
Warning you, indeed, that there is likely to be a bid, and I can't say when, but for the decarbonisation of Buckingham Palace Road, which is likely to be a reasonably significant bid. We need to do a lot of work to prepare for that, but our boilers are reaching the end of their useful life, and we obviously must consider both best practice in their replacement, but also the potential for being a model of good practice that others might find helpful. We have a wonderful heritage building that requires special treatment, so I'm just flagging that this is something we're working on and will at some point be coming to you.
We'll take that. We'll take that. Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question to Gareth. It feels to me from listening to you that it's really important to the National Audit Office to remain responsive and adaptable within evolving policy landscapes, and that those landscapes can particularly be shifted when there's a change of political parties in government, a change of Prime Minister, for instance. I was really struck by the report that the NAO put out in January, which was looking at the government's mission around halving the incidence of violence against women and girls, and supporting the government to try and meet that. That felt like a report which came through quite quickly after the elections of government. Are there things that the NAO do when there is a new government in order to be as quickly responsive as possible so that it can start to bring to bear its analytical insights as quickly as possible?
Well, clearly, we keep our programme under constant review to make sure that it's relevant to what's going on. Actually, in that example, we were going to do that work. We decided to do that work well before the election, actually, because it was explicitly an audit of the previous government's strategy for reducing violence against women and girls. Of course, assumed new topicality with being part of the Safer Streets mission and so on. So that's an example where something we'd already planned turned out to be particularly relevant. But of course, we are also looking at our whole programme through the lens of the government's mission approach to make sure that we're not the only ones left looking at silos when others are trying to look across systems. We've got a good track record of doing that anyway. So we've looked at, for example, clean energy as a whole system for some time, just to take one of the other examples. But it's also important that we're not entirely driven by the way the government is choosing to tackle those areas, because sometimes some of the value we add is by reporting on an unfashionable area that has been neglected, and that's some very, very strong examples of that. For example, nobody could understand why we wanted to look at the how child trust funds were being taken up by the people who had received all that public money 12 years ago, because it wasn't any part of the then government's agenda. But actually us raising it and getting attention focused on, actually there's a lot of public money here that will miss its target because people have now lost contact with this money that was due to their 18-year-old. Turned out to be a really prescient and useful piece of work that, as I say, nobody was talking about. But of course, most of our programme, we focus on the big risks to value for money, the way that to be relevant to how government is tackling it, and I mean that's why our strategy focus on productivity and resilience, I think it speaks very loudly to all of those missions, because it's a response to the value for money agenda we can see that the government is having to grapple with in both of those thematic areas. So yeah, we responsive all the time, obviously responsive to PAC's requirements as well, and at any one time, if you take a snapshot of our programme, you'll see long planned work, you'll see work in response to PAC's interest, something that's become much more topical because of government's priorities, and then the work in the dusty corners, as we call it, where nobody's talking about it, but we think it's important to examine.
Thank you. And you were saying earlier that you think it's possible, if not likely, that you'll need to bring a supplementary estimate. On that topic, I appreciate that the NAO will be working and responding to information that you hope will be as accurate and timely as complete as possible, but that isn't always the case. So when you may have a change of government, either because a new political party is elected or because you've got a new Prime Minister, do you ever build contingency into the estimates that you make, realising, of course, that you can't always predict what new bodies get created and what bodies get abolished?
No, we don't. So our principle on budgeting is to have no contingency, but to have an understanding with the Commission that if it's absolutely unavoidable to do our job properly, that we will come for a supplementary estimate. But obviously, it's a matter of pride for us as accountants that that's only where we've exhausted all the possibilities of internal efficiencies, reprioritisation, and so on. So you absolute assurance from me that when and if we do that, it's because we absolutely have to, not because we're saving ourselves a difficult challenge. And that's important to say. And I think that is the consistent approach across government as well, not to build in contingencies just in case. But I think just to give you an example of where how do we have a responsive programme, because I think that's the heart of your question on this. We pre-allocate around about 75-80% of our resources on value for money work to a programme that's planned into the future about 18 months. We reserve 20-25% of our value for money resource for responsive work, and that team is always busy. They're never sitting around waiting for a commission, but it does mean that at short notice we can allocate work and resource to deliver something that's clearly required in the public interest or that PAC has a strong interest in, and that mechanism has worked really well. I mean, it's obviously we needed it in spades in the pandemic, but since then there's been a constant demand for responsive work.
And sometimes, if I may say, in response to MPs' concerns. So we get a lot of requests to do work which we can't always fulfil, but occasionally there's a volume of asks for a particular piece of work, and it's a good position to be in to be able to respond positively.
My constituents in Bournemouth East are always really eager to achieve better outcomes for less money. And that obviously links to the question of some of the changes made by the government. So whether it's about upping defence spending or it's about bringing the NHS back into direct ministerial control. Of the changes that have been announced by government, are there any which particularly stand out for you as likely to lead you to request a supplementary estimate?
Yes. Well, not necessarily a supplementary estimate. Certainly in reprioritising our work programme, you mentioned defence. I think that's worth dwelling on briefly. Actually, before the announcement of the increase in the MOD budget, we'd already added a second director to our value for money team for defence work, because we were having to do quite a lot of defence work. And if we hadn't already decided to do that, we would now, because that question of, it's one thing to take difficult priority decisions in government to move money to defence for obvious reasons in the current situation. It's another thing to deliver real value for that extra spending, and as you know from lots of PAC reports on defence procurement, it's not been a happy story in many cases there. So we see that there's a really big, I'm sure there's a big expectation in Parliament that the NAO will continue to shed light via the work of PAC on is this additional money delivering the capability that it was expected to deliver, and so we're geared up to do that, and we have reprioritised our programme to be able to respond to that requirement. And in the opposite direction, a couple of years ago, we reported on how FCDO had managed the reduction in aid spending from 0.7% to 0.5%. There's a lot of lessons in there for how to minimise the negative impact of that on programmes around the world. Those lessons are definitely going to be applicable if they're going further down from 0.5 to 0.3%. So in both senses, what's the additional money? Is it achieving what it was intended to? But also, how are the reductions elsewhere being managed to minimise the damage of that, but also to make sure that we're still getting value for money on what's left.
Thank you. Has your investment in the audit transformation programme paid off?
It really has. I've talked a lot about our use of technology and so on. That's only possible because we've given ourselves this platform through this audit transformation programme. It's lasted 4 years. It's coming to an end formally in April, and we've delivered what we said we would on budget and on time, which obviously for us was really important, given we spend a lot of our time looking at whether government does that with its major programmes. But really, what has this given us? It's given us a new audit methodology, which is now compliant with the latest auditing standards. We have a new audit software platform called Apex, which is cloud-based, very resilient, and allows us to plug in new analytic tools as they become available after we've tested them and found them to be useful. We can plug them in and make them available to the whole staff. It's also transformed our ability to understand where the quality risks are and the delivery risks are in our work, because it's essentially one big database now. So the team that's responsible for our audit practice can run a report instantly that tells us how many audits have this as a significant risk, and have we applied the relevant expertise to those risks properly? Is the progress of our audit on track to deliver our pre-recess targets? And if not, why not? All of that, this is now a very powerful management information source, as well as a better audit tool. So we're very pleased with the outcome of all of that. And we've got a functioning software platform that, first of all, has proven its effectiveness in use across all our audits. But just a vote of confidence in it is offered by Audit Scotland, our sister organisation responsible for auditing the Scottish Government, and they are adopting the Apex tool that we've developed, saving all the development costs they'd otherwise have to incur. They still have to obviously negotiate their own arrangement with a third-party technology partner that we worked with, but a massive saving to the UK taxpayer in that case. And this is well before people are ready to talk about it, but the new local audit agency is going to have to develop an in-house audit capability. There's a tool ready there for it to consider, and again, save the time and cost of development if necessary. So in terms of taxpayer benefit, I'm very proud of the result of that programme.
And final question for me, it sounds like that having been so successful, any further changes won't be transformative, they'll be iterative. Is that right?
Yes, the last big transformative one, the last piece of that jigsaw is a high security portal between us and every government department and arm's length body, allowing us to import their data directly into our system to carry out the data analytics I was talking about earlier on. All the big firms do this with their large company audits. So this will only be limited really by the ability of each government department and public body to provide high quality data and so on. But there's a lot of testing has gone into the security of that. But that's the next big productivity gain for everybody actually, because if once you can automate that process, the hassle and cost of providing data for the auditor, answering their queries, because the portal controls the raising and clearance of queries as well. It takes a lot of time and cost out of that process. So that's the last big transformative bit to come in. After that, it really is about then deploying new tools as they become available from the market.
Okay, move on. Geoffrey.
This is question 12.
Is.
Yeah. CNAG, table 10, figure 10 on page 34 of your estimates, tells us where you get your income from. And for the purpose of the question at the moment, I'd like to just concentrate on your overseas work. Now, the memorandum that we have with this committee and yourselves on scheme of fees doesn't cover, I believe, overseas work. So the question then arises is what profit margin can you make on that overseas mark? How do you set what profit you're going to make?
Well, at the moment we aim to cover our costs including overheads. So in other words, we make a contribution to the overheads that are relevant to that work rather than seeking to make a margin on top of that. It's largely because, first of all, it's not high volume, as you can see. This is marginal activity in the scheme of the NEO's overall operations. Typically, this work is two main types. It's doing international audits, so the audit of international organisations. We audit the International Telecoms Union, based in Geneva, as a UN body. We've always audited a number of UN bodies over the years. They are competitive processes. They will invite bids from national audit offices of member countries, and we're typically always at the expensive end on those because obviously we have higher labour costs than many audit offices, and some are prepared. They see this as a matter of national prestige, and they are prepared to make a loss on their audits of these bodies. Our policy is not to do that. So if we can't win the work with a proper fee, we won't do it. And I think that's an important kind of ethical as well as financial stance that we take. It means we don't have too many of these things as well. But we do a good job when we get the opportunity, and it's very good development for our staff to work on those. The second category of work is capacity building work, which is more project based. So this is sometimes FCDO funded, and they're essentially, we've just done work with Tanzania Audit Office, for example, the Gambia Audit Office. This is sharing some of our methodologies and approaches and training in a way that they find useful for building their own capacity. And again, that's FCDO will fund us for our costs plus overheads rather than a profit margin. So that's why the work's done on that basis at the moment.
Are there any of your audits that you do which actually build in a profit element, or are they all done on costs and overheads?
Well, our UK work clearly is designed to just recover our costs. So there's no profit line in the NAO's accounts. We're a public body, and the difference between our costs of the fees we charge some of our company audits, the difference between those two numbers and the other income we generate from our building and so on, that's the estimate that we ask the Commission to approve. So it would only be if there wouldn't be much sense in us building a profit margin for our UK work, because we would just have to come ask you for a bigger estimate. It's the discretionary international work where we have to take a judgment about fees. The judgment we take at the moment, I think, protects our financial position, means we're not making a loss on that work, which I think is important. But any more, I think we would struggle to win it.
Last but not least, Phil Brickell.
Question for Rebecca Sheeran. One of your income sources is renting out a proportion of your London offices. Could you tell the Commission what your current rental plans are, please?
So our plan built into the estimate for next year is that we would let out 8 of our floors next year, which would we hope bring in about £2.3 million of income. Our current position is that we expect to start the year with 7 of those floors let out, so we'll be working hard to attract a further tenant. We are, of course, a little bit dependent on London property market. We contend with things like quite high business rates in Westminster, but we've recently put quite a lot of effort into updating our offer, our marketing information, appointing some new property agents to help us draw in that new tenant, as well as doing some small works like rebranding our main reception area so that it feels like an inclusive space. By the end of the 5-year strategy period, we are hoping we would be able to let out 11 floors, which would represent about £3 million of income and would mean that we were letting out some 58% of our floor space by that point.
Okay. Thank you. Very helpful.
Okay, well that concludes today's evidence session. So can I thank you very much for coming along this morning. The Commission will now deliberate in private order.
Thank you.